Hi again, and welcome to the latest episode of Europe Climate Connection, where we hear from an incredible array of experts working on the climate emergency and energy transition, and who all have one thing in common: they are all members of Climate Action Network Europe. I'm Rachel Bravins, co-host alongside the fabulous Olivia Saxa. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to be back. I'm excited about this episode. Today, we'll take a step out of our comfort zone and think about the future we would like to see, how we can design it collectively, and have a bottom-up approach where all voices from the community are heard.
Absolutely, Olivia. And to help us take that trip away from the status quo, we have Simona Getova from Kolektiv Z, which is based in North Macedonia. And Simona will talk us through some of the newest concepts and pertinent topics like intersectionality, decoloniality, or positionality. And if you're as intrigued as we are, then stay tuned.
Welcome, everyone, and a huge welcome to Simona Getova from Kolektiv Z in North Macedonia. Hi, Simona. Thanks for joining us. We're both ready to make lots of notes on how to create a better future. As an introduction, could you tell us a bit about your journey and how you came to this project, Envisioning Futures?
Right. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Olivia, as well. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I come from a very small town in the southeast of Macedonia, where these conversations were being held in the framework of ecological justice and overall ecology. So like the well-being of the planet and our natural surroundings, right? And through that, I got involved with ecologist movement of Macedonia, after which I got involved with the Young Friends of the Earth Europe. And I feel like I own a lot to my involvement with Young Friends of the Earth Europe, but also many of the comrades and decolonial intersectional feminists that are people of color from Latin America and across of the African continent, that I've learned so much, and that has led me to my current work, which is my doctoral research. What then attracted me to the idea of doing this project is the conversations that we've had with many change makers and active citizens in Macedonia. There was a copper mine being built a kilometer away from my house. It led me to organizing with my community, and this was also part of, in a way, me also thinking, why did we even let it come this far? It was about the narrative, right? Like this progress, this development that we need, that is brought to us from somewhere. And so if we let this narrative of development that was imposed on us without the consultation of us, of the people on the ground, it was not only letting a huge ecological destruction to happen in our backyard, but also letting this narrative of extractive and capitalist progress wait. And so we did win. We managed to make the government stop that project. But that is to say that then we had to continue the conversations. Okay, if we don't want that type of progress, what type of progress do we want? What do we mean by this change system? And I guess that is a very natural flow of how I got involved and how I helped build this project on a Young Friends of the Earth level. That also happened. These conversations also happened in many different groups in different countries across the European continent.
Can you just give us a quick explanation of the project and why you felt it was necessary to start this method of deconstructing narratives and rebuilding them in a very inclusive and bottom-up way?
The project was essentially around collective visioning of our future, but also reimagining the present in a way. The way we felt with Kolektiv Z and with comrades that we have been collaborating for years is that very, very often in the climate justice movement, we have this system change, not climate change slogan that we kind of guide ourselves by. And we really felt like with the group, we felt like we need to discuss what system change actually means for our context in Macedonia and in the Balkan region, because we felt like it is very often left out of the conversation, out of the Western movement. What does system change actually mean for us, for our movements, and for the communities in Macedonia and the Balkans? So it started as a conversation between, firstly between comrades in 2018, and then it kind of developed as a conversation with more groups that work on very different topics, very different issues within their own communities, but still do an essential work and better the lives of their communities for years themselves, which is why we felt like it is the grassroots organizations that do the job on the ground, know best how we can build up and how can we do that in a just and an intersectional way. So the way we approach at first the in-person conversations, facilitated conversations, is by bringing together organizers from different groups, different communities, and popular education methods to first and foremost to approach them and to facilitate the group to get to know each other, and then to feel more comfortable to do the envisioning together. And then for the collective visioning part, we went about in a way that we first facilitated people to do this envisioning individually and we took 2030 as a milestone year, as a year in the future where we asked ourselves, how do we envision it? And it was a series of questions, including who do you see around you? How is society organized? How is work organized? Is it paid? How is care organized towards the youth, the young people, towards the elderly? Which smells, what art, what dances and music, what do you see around you? So we did, this was a series of questions that people first took the time to answer and do the visioning process themselves individually, and then we did this within a group. And from the group visioning process, 9 different topics that were the most present came out. And these 9 topics, starting from education to energy systems, their democratization and repairment, to how is food cultivated, these 9 topics then became the cornerstone of the grassroots Green New Deal.
That's great. And when you talk about intersectionality, what does that mean to you at Kolektiv Z? And how do you ensure that that's kind of fed through in the whole project?
Yeah, so we are approaching any of our organizing in an intersectional way. And what that means for us, it's an approach that both identifies and challenges the interlocking systems of oppression that affect us all, but in a very different way. And the way we approach it is build solidarities and build allyships with groups that are not necessarily in the climate justice movement per se, but are part of the social justice movement overall. We work very closely with groups working on reproductive justice within Roma communities, groups working on disability justice, groups working on education of Roma youth, also youth groups working on various different topics. And we felt like this is the only way to build that necessary narrative that challenges capitalist and imperial mode of being that is taken so for granted right now as a narrative that cannot be changed, and that this is the only way to go throughout your life and throughout your work, and kind of you have to accept that capitalism is the system that is going to engulf us and the planet and every single living thing. So at this point, I guess I'd like to mention an inspiration of both mine, but also of the collective, is the work of Ursula Le Guin, and how she says that we live in capitalism whose power seems inescapable, but the divine right of kings, right? but any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. And we felt like working together in solidarity and very closely to all these groups that are already changing people's and their communities' lives for the better is the only way forward. Really listening to the people that are affected and on the front lines.
Let's now elaborate a bit further on the intersectionality issue. You mentioned it is quite trendy at the moment, but should every group be picking this up? What would you recommend to organizations that really want to engage on the issue? What should they do to really walk the talk? And maybe can you share some of your experiences and expertise from Kolektiv Z?
And so I would say for big organizations is being aware of the access that they have to policymakers, or the voice that they have, a voice that is more often than not in terms of big conversations, much more heard in policymaking and decision-making spaces compared to groups and demands that are very local and very grassroots. I do believe that every group and every organization can be and should be more intersectional in their organizing. I feel like the way this is meant to be approached, rooted in the work and theorization, but also praxis of Black and other feminists of color, is by seeing how these different mainstream oppressive systems affect us in a very different way. So I would say if a group works on feminist issues and on gender issues and on reproductive justice, I would say, but can you check your own privilege? Where do you come from? At least this is what we try to do in our organizing. First start with, in this context, right, as privileged white woman from, although the semi-periphery, I have been able to, I have certain educational and academic privilege and certain experiences and background throughout life that I did not leave them at the door when I enter a space. And then I really need to see in which context, if I'm in hypothetical scenario in Brussels, in a room filled with middle-aged men, white men, then that is a very specific position that I'm in. If I'm, on the other hand, in Morocco with comrades from all around the African continent, and I'm there as a researcher, that is also a very specific dynamic, a power dynamic that should be accounted for. So first and foremost, I would think that the first step is to check our own positionality in the context that we're active in. So for groups to do that, you should first think of how they approach a space and what are their interlocking identities that they bring and experiences through life that they bring into a space. Secondly, I think if a group works on, let's say, as I said, gender justice, they should ask the additional questions like, how is racist patriarchy affecting these people or us, right? Like, it's not only the patriarchal setup that affects and exacerbates these injustices, but how does race come to it, and how does class, is someone that is poor being affected even more than someone who, even though is maybe a woman of color, but a well-off woman of color. This is a very fine line, I would say, really how all of these systems that affect us all, but in a very different way, how do we tackle them? How do we challenge them? How do we bring our own very specific capacities as well and positionalities to change things? Decolonize your social imaginary and your way of organizing by centering your political demands around the political demands of these groups that know the best and that are doing the work on the ground.
Thank you. So to those listening, support the people who do the work on the ground. Center your political demands around the demands of groups on the ground. And for this, I guess you need to listen.
Yeah, listening's so key. So positionality is a very interesting concept, and one that actually some of our listeners, it might be quite new for them. although it can be quite self-descriptive, if you were to give a basic definition of positionality, what would it be?
It's essentially bringing all of your identities that you're both aware and unaware of, and you're experiencing your experiences with you within a specific context. And positionality essentially is being aware of them, just being very, very aware of how any of these experiences and interlocking identities that you have, how are they affecting a conversation that you're in?
Absolutely. It's so important to put some time aside to have those discussions and to face those big questions, face on. And I think one of those concepts that's also incredibly important at the moment is decoloniality. And like intersectionality, that's also becoming quite trendy. It's quite buzzy. Lots of people are talking about it. So do you think there's a parallel situation between those two, intersectionality and decoloniality, and that they're being mainstreamed into the narrative, but there's not necessarily that much happening in reality? And if so, how do we, as organizations, as movements, decolonize ourselves?
Yes, I do believe they're very, very connected. They're both connected in theory, but also in practice. And the way I see them connected in practice is there are many groups that, especially, for example, in indigenous groups that approach their organizing in a way that is very, very spiritual and very connected to the land and the traditions that have been there for thousands of years, in a way that how we can decolonize then our joint organizing is to really, again, going back to listening, but also accepting the way these local grassroots and indigenous groups are going about the resistance to a specific oppressive project. So that is one way. Another way is within conversations to really question ourselves, to question the conversation and see whose voices are not being heard, who is not here in the room, who's not on the table, who are we missing to hear, right? And so I feel like that is an extremely important way as well.
Absolutely. Participation is so key. And to make sure that as many voices and diverse voices are at the table is so incredibly important.
So now looking specifically at this field experience and how you worked with Roma communities, how did you approach those communities that maybe normally do not relate with you and have a different cultural context? How did you manage to build the trust concretely? So what's the story there?
Right. Thank you, Olivia. I mean, I think you mentioned a very big element, and that is building trust with these groups, and just the awareness that this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by just approaching one organizer from this community. It happens with being there and showing up to moments, and in a way that it's important to these groups, just being there and experiencing, going through the day the way these people are going through their day, seeing what's important to these groups. I think that is the biggest one. That's the only way to build trust. But also if you have more, then you distribute, which is what happened with Kolektiv Z and the resources that we had. It was by distribution and just trusting that redistribution and just trusting that it is these groups that know how to use these resources in the best possible way that would help their community.
Incredible. So in terms of the process of the project, now that you've gone through this phase of conversations, the collective construction of those future visions, what are the next steps? And how do you go about transforming awareness into action?
Right. Well, we are currently finalizing the National Green New Deal document. But for example, the Balkan Green Deal document and the principles for a green and just recovery for the Balkan region, those two documents are available. And they were the two documents, the Balkan Green Deal and the principles for for Green and Just Recovery for the Balkans are a result of this process being done with groups and individuals from across the Balkans from different local and grassroots organizing initiatives. And then there is the national one that we had so many more responses, and that requires a lot of more work and thought being put into constructing that. So by having that, then the National Grassroots Green Deal document, our vision, we hope to approach policymakers that are starting some of these conversations have been started already with the European Commission around the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. So we hope to impact that process, but also we really see this vision document as a guide for all of our groups and for the movement for social and environmental justice really in Macedonia to use it as a guide in the way we do our organizing. And then it is up to the different groups to see and use it how they see it fit. But also having gone through this process, in fact, we created the Coalition of the Future. And so with the coalition, we hope to really do a political pressure on policymakers, but also continue organizing together and in solidarity with each other, which is of utmost importance. So a lot of work ahead.
Absolutely. No rest just yet. Still lots of work to do. Thank you so much, Simona. And we've really enjoyed listening to you today. So thank you. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Europe Climate Connection. Thank you so much to all of our listeners. We hope you can join us next time when we'll be discussing how we can stop funding climate chaos. We'll learn what it takes to fight for a budget that is really green, the impact of fossil fuel subsidies, and the potential impact of the so-called taxonomy.
You have been listening to Europe Climate Connection, an original podcast presented by Can Europe. Europe Climate Connection is hosted by Olivia Saxer and Rachel Brabbins. Samuel Martin Sosa is the executive producer and editor. Script by Rachel Brabbins. Recorded and edited by Big Audio Media that also provided training, mentorship, and assistance during the process.
And you can subscribe to our podcast via your favorite podcasting platform and find out more about our work at Climate Action Network Europe on our website, caneurope.org. Take care and hope to see you next time.